All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's so nice to see that it's light again this late. Makes it a little easier to come out in the evening. We'd like to welcome you here tonight to our first Conesville Historical Society program of 2026. On your way in, there were flyers for some of our upcoming events, as well as a handout with a list of other events. I think we have it through August or September, and we plan to add a few more things in there depending on availability of speakers and other things. So tonight's program is special to us because we're hosting a Conesville native. Yeah. So Jason Merwin is here, and he is the executive director at the Catskill Watershed Corporation, and he's here to share with us all about the work that the Catskill Watershed Corporation does, along with some history, and we're so excited to have you, Jason.
Thanks, Jen. I know you guys put on a presentation a handful of months ago about the construction of the Schoharie Reservoir and the old news footage. And when I saw that being put on, I reached out to Kim at that point and said, I'd love to talk more about watershed issues. I think I could jump in, maybe that'd be relevant. And she said, I had a couple days open over those next couple weeks, so I was looking forward to it. And she said, how about in 6 or 7 months? So I think that's a testament to the great work that Kim's doing with her programming and everything. As Kim said, my name is Jason Merwin. I'm the executive director of the Catskill Watershed Corporation. I am a Conesville native, born and raised here in Conesville, grew up on Beaver Hill Road. Spent a lot of time on South Mountain Road as well as a kid. Got out for a little bit for college, got my bachelor's degree at the University of Central Florida in political science, and ended up getting pulled back and got my master's degree in public administration, and have been working at CWC for 15 years with the directorship for the last 5 years. So, if there's one thing that you guys take away from the entire meeting today, you fall asleep, you've got bad memories, whatever it is, CWC is not DEP. It's very confusing, I understand, but CWC is a local nonprofit organization, and we provide grants to offset costs of DEP regulations. It is a voluntary participation program, and our main focus is on community sustainability for our local communities. DEP, on the other hand, is an agency of New York City government. They enforce regulations within the watershed. They mandate compliance of those regulations, and their main focus is on water quality and delivering water down to New York City. That's the only thing you remember. We're different. So the things I want to go over today is a little bit of watershed history, the creation of CWC and how that was done, and then we'll get into some details on the specific CWC programs. I know a lot of people say, hold your questions to the end, but I find it more useful. If somebody has questions during slides, feel free to ask. I think sometimes that's the best way to engage it and answer questions. So, as you may know, more than 1 billion gallons of water is consumed in New York City every single day. It comes mostly from the upstate west of Hudson watershed. 90% of it from the 6 Catskill reservoirs. This is a map of the 6 basins. My pointer doesn't work very well on the TV, but you can see the Schoharie Basin where we are. You see Conesville up in the top there. Everything from Hunter actually flows north up into the Schoharie Reservoir. The Schoharie Reservoir actually is connected to the Ashokan Reservoir down below it. And that is what makes up the Catskill system. And then the other 4 reservoirs in Delaware, Ulster, Sullivan counties all are part of the Delaware system. So there's 2 separate systems, the Schoharie system and the Delaware system. That all ends up down in New York City. It includes parts of 5 counties, 39 towns, 8 villages, and is roughly 1,600 square miles. So the reservoirs, as you guys know, were created through the destruction of 26 local communities here in the watershed and displaced over 5,500 people. This is a photo of the Schoharie Reservoir just as it was getting completed. You can see the village of Gilboa is still in the picture. Some of the homes and businesses were relocated, but mostly whole communities were leveled and taken away to build the reservoirs. The last reservoir, sometimes we think about the Gilboa Reservoir being built in the 1920s, finished in the 1920s. That was 100 years ago, so long ago. The Cannonsville Reservoir over in Delaware County, that was just done in 1965. So this is still really fresh in a lot of people's minds, especially over in Delaware County. In addition to just taking the homes that people lived in, there was also a lot of consequences for other aspects of taking the reservoirs, removal of bodies. And if you think about where those properties are located, they weren't up on the hills. These were the valley areas where people developed. They were the best farmland. This is why they created villages. There's the limited flat spaces that we had here in the Catskills. So by taking those communities, they weren't just random, they were some of the most important communities to the watershed. And here's a panoramic of the village of Gilboa. Again, you can see before all the houses were taken away and destroyed, to 10 years later when there was nothing there. So as all the reservoirs were being built, animosity is built up with the local property owners, the local communities, but things were relatively status quo for the most part after that. City had their regulations. People may remember or have seen in history books, the white New York City property, do not enter signs that were all over the watershed. That's kind of where everything was right up until 1986. When the federal government ended up amending a piece of legislation known as the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. And they amended it to basically say that any surface water supply that supplies a municipality has to be filtered. All the city's water up here in the reservoirs is surface water. It doesn't come from a well. So this means New York City would have to filter their water supply, along with every other surface water supply in the country. But there was a loophole in that legislation that said if you can prove that you can keep the water clean at its source through control and regulations and whatever other measures, you can get a waiver of this rule from EPA and you don't have to filter your water. So New York City had a history of this. They felt very comfortable that no problem, we'll get our waiver, we'll restrict all activity near the water courses, and we'll either buy or condemn the remaining land up there, and we will evidence our control of the watershed through regulations and purchasing all the properties. So it's almost a miracle that it happened, but 35 towns from these 5 different counties actually ended up getting together and talking and saying, we can't let this happen to us. We've already seen what's happened with the reservoirs. We can't let these regulations, condemnation, land purchases happen. We need to stand up and fight. And they had 2 main demands as they were pushing with the city and the federal government and the state, that the land could only be acquired from willing sellers, so no more eminent domain and condemnation, and that watershed residents and businesses would not have to pay to keep the city water clean. If there were regulations or anything else that were above and beyond what anybody else in the state had to do, that burden shouldn't fall on us. So those were the 2 main things that we were looking for here in the watershed communities. So this went on for years. Lots of court cases, lawsuits, negotiations. The state was involved, federal government involved, Department of Health, DEC. Eventually, as we were getting closer to an agreement, a number of environmental organizations from the state ended up getting into the agreements and having their own concerns about how this was going to work. And eventually, in 1997, there was the signing of the 1997 Watershed Memorandum of Agreement. And the governor at the time was George Pataki. Behind him, the mayor of New York City was Rudy Giuliani. And the taller guy there in front is actually Robert Kennedy Jr., who was representing Riverkeeper at the time as one of the environmental parties. So, we got kind of lucky from the watershed perspective, because at the time that these negotiations were happening, especially early on, the mayor was Mario Cuomo. And Rudy Giuliani had been mayor, and during the primary between Cuomo and Pataki, who happened to live in the east of Hudson watershed, so he was at least relatively aware of what was going on with the reservoirs and the watershed regulations. Mayor Giuliani endorsed Mario Cuomo, the Democrat, and then Cuomo lost. So Pataki didn't have a whole lot of love lost for Giuliani at the time to necessarily support those city objectives. We know the city controls a lot of the state. What the city wants, the city kind of gets, whether it's through the city or through the state legislature. So we actually ended up with an ally with Governor Pataki to help understand our concerns and interests up in the watershed, to help us get a settlement that ended up being very beneficial for the communities. Granted, not everybody loves it. I understand it's never perfect. There's always more people think could have been done. But for that time, those circumstances, I think people did a really good job in those negotiations to get the communities the programs that currently exist. So the result of those negotiations was that New York City got their filtration waiver. That was their goal. That's what they wanted. They also got a permit from New York State DEC that would allow them to purchase land outside of their boundaries up in the watershed. And they got the right to impose strict regulations. The regulations that ultimately came in place were actually, they're still restrictive, but they are way less restrictive than they originally were proposed prior to these negotiations. The watershed interests got funding to pay for the environmental protection programs, many of which CWC manages: septic replacement, stormwater, wastewater funding. Support for an economic development fund for the watershed. CWC manages an economic development fund where we provide low interest loans to small businesses throughout the watershed. And good neighbor payments to the municipalities as an inducement to sign the MOA. Basically a payment to each town and county that signed on. So with the new watershed rules and regulations, some of the main issues to be addressed were septic systems, stormwater, and wastewater. The MOA is huge. It's a 3-binder document. There's a lot of paragraphs, a lot of language, a lot of exhibits, but the 6th paragraph within the MOA spelled out that the parties, which are all the parties, the locals, the state, the city, etc., recognize that the goals of drinking water protection and economic viability within the watershed communities are not inconsistent, and it's the intention of the parties to enter into a new era of partnership to cooperate in the development and implementation of a watershed protection program that maintains and enhances the quality of the drinking water supply and the economic vitality and social character of the Catskill watersheds. So the idea was they're not mutually exclusive goals. We can do this together. Good environmental development, but will have good benefits to water quality. But by supporting that development with financing, that helps the local communities be sustainable. So also, right in the MOA was the creation of CWC. It was something that was contemplated, discussed, negotiated, and actually part of the agreement. The parties agree that in order to establish a working partnership between the city and the West of Hudson communities, and to carry out the purposes of the agreement, an independent, locally based, and locally administered not-for-profit corporation, the Catskill Watershed Corporation, shall be established to manage certain watershed partnership and protection programs. Right there, the idea was an independent agency. So CWC staffing and administration, independent, locally based, and locally administered. We had to be local because there was such mistrust of the city. If the city was going to be administering these programs and handing out grants for people who needed septic system replacements, Who is going to volunteer to the regulator, New York City much less, that they have a failing septic system that they could get a violation for? The thought just didn't make sense. It couldn't be the city administering the programs. Resident participation levels would depend on trust. It took a long time, even for CWC, to gain the trust of the local people. Even though we were managed by local officials, local staff, well, you're the city, we're not dealing with you, we're not telling you anything, you're New York City. People still think that today. That's why we start with that first slide, that there's a difference. Local accountability. Our board members are locally elected officials. Our board are elected officials from around the watershed who elect other elected officials. So there's multiple layers of accountability, and they have terms. They don't stay on our board forever. If people don't think they're doing a good job on our board, they could be voted out. And we have familiarity with the region. Who better to help improve the situation than the people here on the ground? We also had to be independent from the city so we could create our own policies. We didn't want them dictating how to run our own programs. We had to be able to make our own funding decisions and ensure the funding commitment for the watershed. If the city just said that we were going to provide $50 million for septic programs and they put it in their budget down in New York City, what's the reality that that money is not going to get diverted to something else if they needed to use it for something else? So we wanted to make sure that money was coming into our communities. Also good thinking ahead is that we had to be independent from the counties because there was a concern of regionalism. We've got Delaware, Schoharie, Greene, Ulster, and Sullivan. They're very different counties. We're all upstate, relatively rural counties, but there's a lot of differences between those types of counties. So we didn't necessarily want populous Ulster County taking all the funds away from more rural Delaware and Schoharie County, but we also have a lot of the watershed in Delaware County. We didn't want Delaware County taking everything from themselves and not sharing it elsewhere. So the idea was it was going to be a town organization, but that the counties, wouldn't necessarily be the main players. And the same as the issue with the city, if these funds went directly to the counties, our concerns would be we didn't want them to end up in the county's general funds and be used for highway repairs outside the watershed when the funds were supposed to be specifically for the watershed communities. Just because there's 5 counties involved doesn't mean every town in every one of those counties is in the watershed. So if there's only 2 or 3 towns, Schoharie County is a perfect example. Gilboa, Jefferson, and Conesville are the 3 Schoharie County towns. If all this money was flowing to Schoharie County, would we feel real confident that Conesville would get its share of watershed funding, or is Colderskill going to take a piece of that? So credit to all these people back in the 90s thinking this far ahead. So our board membership, we have 15 board members. Our local members all serve 4-year terms, and our board membership is made up by population or size in the watershed. So Delaware County is more than half of the watershed. So they have 6 seats on our board. Greene County and Ulster County each have 2, and Sullivan and Schoharie County each have 1. New York City gives 1 member on our board that's appointed by the mayor, and the governor appoints 2 people to our board. Currently we have a DEC representative and an environmental rep who works for the Catskill Center. Our board requires 10 votes to pass any resolution. So you can see no one county or party has the 10 votes. They have to work collaboratively in order to get things through. And for the most part, they do. Almost all of our resolutions are unanimous. Not every, but it does take some coalition building and partnership between our board members to move things through.
Jason?
Yep.
Is all of Jefferson in the watershed?
No, very little.
Very little.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions so far? So this is just a quick highlight of how many layers of bureaucracy and agencies that we work with on a nearly daily basis. We work within our 5 counties, 39 towns, 8 villages, The Coalition of Watershed Towns still exists. They meet once a month typically. They're also a group of elected officials separate from the CWC board. We work a lot with our local soil and water districts, the Watershed Agricultural Council, Cornell Cooperative Extensions, and the residents and public within the watershed. Within the city, there are so many layers of bureaucracies and levels at each agency. It's crazy. In New York State, we deal a lot with DEC, Department of Health, Department of State, Department of Transportation, the Attorney General's office, and as a public authority, we're a nonprofit, but we're also a local public authority because we deal with so much public funding. So we work with the authority's budget office in New York State. And then also that FAB that we talked about before was initially issued by US EPA, and we work with a number of environmental groups and Army Corps of Engineers. Yeah.
So what is the Coalition of Watershed Towns? Do you know? How is it different?
They're more of a political wing, trying to, I don't mean politics in a negative way, I mean to try to get concerns from local communities, try to figure out if there's watershed issues. So it's more of a issues-based political division, where CWC is more of an administrator of programs. So I listed the last 4 years worth of our budget, and our budget's been right around $60 million a year for the last 4 years. And that's mostly through these programs: our septic rehabilitation and replacement program, community wastewater management program, future stormwater retrofit, economic development, public education. These yellow programs are programs that were not initially listed in the MOA. These white ones were. These yellow ones came after the MOA in subsequent agreements that we've made with the city over the last 30 years. So we have a septic maintenance program, flood hazard mitigation implementation program, workforce development, local technical assistance, tax litigation and avoidance program. And these two red programs are programs that work in the MOA but are completed and no longer active. The municipal salt and storage program, a lot of town halls had salt buildings, so we actually paid for new, better salt buildings so that salt would not drain into the water. Again, great example of mutually beneficial program for both the city and the local community. And the stream corridor program.
So you don't have the salt shed?
No, but that is something I get asked all the time. How about a maintenance program for the salt sheds?
Yeah.
All the time. So that is something we're actively talking to Department of Health about, and the city about, and the local communities about, to see if that's something that we might want to think about, because not only am I being asked about it, I feel like I can't read a newspaper now without some sort of advertisement in there for people looking for bids for new roofs at their salt sheds. So last year, we dispersed about $26 million in funding. $17.5 million of that was through grants, and $8.5 million in loans. Our septic program is probably our most popular program, our most well-known program. To date, we've replaced over 7,300 septic systems throughout the watershed. It's a proactive and voluntary program. Nobody needs to enroll in our program. The goal is that they can come to us voluntarily, and if they choose, after we explain how the program works, they can apply to participate, and we would help them fund the replacement of their septic system. So back in 1903, this always makes me laugh a little bit. There was a study done on where they were going to put the water, the reservoirs. They weren't 100% sure. They had a couple different options, but the report specifically mentioned that tasteless, odorless, and colorless, this is related to the Catskills. Tasteless, odorless, and colorless, the water was perfect. So was the landscape. The combination of high elevations, steep slopes, a heavily forested watershed, and rocky soil ensured that exceptionally high percentage of precipitation found its way into the streams and creeks. Which makes sense. It's steep here, it's rocky, there's water everywhere. But it is horrible for septic systems. everything that rises to the ground, septic failures, is eventually ending up in the streams. You know, that's where it goes. It's also difficult terrain to actually try to replace septic systems. It's dangerous, it's difficult, and it's costly. And rocky. So the process, just so everyone understands, because there is a good chunk of Conesville in the watershed, is that a homeowner would call CWC and inform us that they might be having some issues. We would go out on site with the property owner and identify if there was a failure. If they choose to join the program, they would fill out some paperwork. At that point, we do inform DEP of the failure. We have an agreement with DEP, which they agreed to and they follow, is that they will not bring enforcement on people who are enrolled in CWC's program. It's hands off. Let CWC deal with it and help these people. They're doing the right thing by being proactive, coming to us. The homeowner hires their own engineer and contractor to perform the work. We don't pick. We want everybody to have all the control. You pick who you want to do the work. Once your engineer develops their plans, DEP is the regulator. They have to review and approve the plans. That's just how it works with the regulatory burden. Once that's approved by DEP, we will look over the plans and we will come up with a dollar amount that we will be willing to reimburse to help you do your septic replacement. If you're a full-time resident in the watershed, we pay up to 100%, typically it's 100% of eligible costs to replace your system. So it's an excellent program. If you're a part-time owner, it's 60%, which is still a really good deal. If the costs are over $30,000, they have to go to our board for formal approval. Once the work is completed, DEP will approve the construction, and CWC will either pay the homeowner back if they give us the receipts of everything that they paid for the work, or we can issue a two-party check or a direct payment to the contractor so property owners don't actually have to come out with any money out of pocket. Best program there is. So this is just some numbers of what we typically do a year. Last year we did 254, which is right around average. Our goal is typically 300, but 254 is pretty good. In 2025, these are the locations throughout the watershed of where those replacements are. Pretty scattered. And I tried to pull Conesville. It's probably a little tough to see in the orange, but these are all the Conesville replacements we've done over the years. And we've gotten really efficient at moving this process along. Back in 2019, it was taking on average about 800 days for somebody to sign into the program until the time that they completed the construction. Nowadays, it's about 459 days. And we're extremely efficient. 93 cents of every dollar of our contracts in the septic program go to grants to property owners. Only 7% of the money used in our contract is for administrative costs. So that septic maintenance program I talked about before in yellow, we were putting all this money into fixing people's septic systems, but then they weren't being maintained. It was too costly to get them pumped out. People forgot to pump them out. They don't know what to do, and then they fail again, and all that money was for nothing. So we developed the septic maintenance program, where now we will pay half the cost for people to do maintenance pump outs on their septic systems. And we've done 6,600 of those to date. And you can see, it took a while to get this program up and running, less than 100 for the first few years. Last year we were over 800 reimbursements. Community wastewater management program. 15 completed projects so far, and our final project is in process. You guys probably recognize that gray building just up the road. West Conesville was one of our community wastewater projects. It's a little hard to see, but there is a black dotted line that shows the West Conesville Septic District. It goes up Bull Hill a little bit, and it's right through West Conesville all the way down to the waterfall house. And again, it is a little hard to see, but you see 990V there. The stream runs right along that little hamlet. The idea of this program is that these are small lots that can't really handle septic systems. So it's hard for the local property owners to have a compliant septic system. They can't. They also can't build additions. They can't add on to their properties. So it puts them in a tough place, but there's also the water quality concerns. If they don't have a compliant septic, chances are there's something leaching into the stream, and as you guys know, that stream runs right behind those properties, right into the big reservoir right there. So another mutually beneficial win-win program, fix the locals' septics and keep the water clean. Completely voluntary. The town had all the options multiple times. I believe the community actually voted on whether to move forward with the program, and Conesville agreed to move forward, and that was completed a couple years ago. So these are all the ones that we've done so far. This 15th one, Shokan, is under construction right now, but to date, it's almost $200 million in community wastewater projects. Nearly 1,500 hookups that were on old, non-compliant septic systems that now have some of the best wastewater treatment there is in the state. And we've done multiple types of wastewater solutions. We've built wastewater treatment plants. We've built extensions to existing wastewater treatment plants for hamlets out of district. Community septics, like we have here in Conesville. We've got the 54 properties, and they go to the big leach field there, just down the road. And we also have septic maintenance districts, which are basically, we put in new septic tanks and then set up a schedule in an organized way to have those pumped consistently, so that there was just so that it's on a good schedule. Yep.
Jason, maybe I missed it. Did you talk about how people get involved with that process and how the payments work?
For community wastewater or for septic?
Well, the septic systems.
Yeah.
Where you replace it.
Yep, we talked about that. Once the system's done, reach out to us, send us all the bills. We'll review everything. If it's within that schedule of values of that number that we reviewed ahead of time, we could pay the property owner back directly if they've already paid, or their contractor for work to be done.
The difference is with your full-time resident or
Yep,
part-time?
100% and 60%.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that anywhere in Conesville or only certain?
Only in the watershed.
Which is?
There's a lot of Conesville in the watershed, but it's not all in the watershed.
Well, which areas would be in the watershed?
Let me see if I have it completely on this map. It's a little hard to see here. Maybe I'll send Kim a link to some watershed maps, and we can try to get you right where that boundary is.
I think Pucker Street and Schufler are not on it.
Yeah, once you get a little north, north and east are out.
So you wouldn't be eligible then for that septic then?
That's right. Which, you bring up a very interesting point, and it's something I don't think anyone 30 years ago ever would have thought. We hear people nowadays go, I wish I lived in the watershed, I'd get a free septic. I wish I lived in the watershed, I'd get it. Nobody imagined 30 years ago that people would want to live in the watershed with these regulations in the city and all these other things. I really credit the work that CWC and the communities have done to make it a desirable place to live. It's just unimaginable that this is where we're going to end up. So that's stormwater and wastewater. We also have stormwater programs. Anytime you hit certain thresholds of new impervious surface, you're building something, you're clearing trees, you're building a parking lot, you have to do stormwater practices above and beyond what exists in the rest of the state. So this project isn't necessarily in Schoharie County. This is Wyndham Manors, that wedding venue up on County Route 10 in Ashland. They built this pond, they put a fountain in, they took these practices and actually made it like an aesthetic venue, and it actually looks really nice. But we reimburse for anything that the city required in those stormwater practices. This is Wyndham Mountain on the right-hand side there, that pond. You can see how big that retention pond is. We help pay for that. This is a stormwater, major stormwater issue in Ulster County. We help them address that runoff. Here's just another couple examples. Rain gardens for some residents, even just small residents. If it triggers, the city regulates it. They make you go through these steps, do what are called stormwater pollution prevention plans. If anybody ever has any stormwater issues, call us. Let us help you before you start the process. To date, we've done 177 projects in our future stormwater program, nearly $20 million worth of projects. MOA 145 is a new program we took over from the city a couple years ago. We've paid for about 50 projects, nearly $5 million. And our retrofit, we've had 3 versions of that program, nearly $23 million worth of those projects as well. All grants. Flood hazard mitigation. This is a photo from our old office building roof during Hurricane Irene. And an old fuel storage tank found in the woods. So some of the projects that are eligible under our flood program are anchoring down fuel tanks that are in the 100-year floodplain. Very low-hanging fruit for ways to help both the local community and water quality. People have probably seen this house before, Main Street, Prattsville. We helped pay for the cost to raise the property up out of the floodplain. And these projects are cool too because you can see people actually put money and funding into updating the property too. You can see what it looked like before it got raised, but then people decide, I'm going to make it, livable and improve the aesthetics of it too. So now it's an actual taxable part, rather than tearing it down, it's a taxable, livable dwelling right in our Main Street there in Prattsville. This is another property in Prattsville. This one was kind of a cool one. This house was raised 14 feet in the air. This is right across from the reservoir there, coming up the Prattsville-Gilboa Road into Prattsville. We also pay for culvert and bridge expansions and improvements. Here's a stream bank that was failing right on a road in Tannersville. So we completely reworked the stream and the stream side and the road. That was a $1.2 million project, very successful. Education grants, we provide education grants to local schools as well as New York City schools in trying to teach them about the importance of where their water comes from and how to keep it clean. Economic development, I can do a whole presentation on what we've done in our economic development program. I always feel guilty this is reduced to one slide, but over $119 million in loans to 400 businesses within the watershed. Think about how rural we are. Where do we even find 400 businesses in the watershed? Some of these are repeat businesses, maybe they sold a building and we did a new loan or a refinance, but this is a major impact to help our local communities. Stream reservoir and cleanup projects. Reservoir boating, we're a big supporter of the reservoir boating program. We finance porta potties, boat racks. We try to get anybody who's willing to do it, steam cleaning equipment to clean the kayaks and canoes so they can go out onto the reservoirs. Again, nobody would have thought 30 years ago DEP would have open property where you don't need a license or anything like that. You do for the reservoirs, but open property or be able to access the reservoir. So that was a big win compared to 30 years ago as well. Outreach and education, we're constantly going out to events. I've got another event after this. I've got one tomorrow. We're always trying to tell people what we do and make sure people are aware of what programs are available to them. We also put on trainings for municipal officials and planning boards. And this model, it's one of my frustrations as executive director of CWC that people locally don't necessarily know what we do, but there are people around the world who do. And this is an internationally recognized model of success of the way that the MOA has become successful with the locals and the city having mutually beneficial programs. So here's just a couple of the contingents of groups from other countries that have come to learn about it. Up in the left is a group from Vietnam, and the bottom right is from India. And on the bottom left, we actually have our communications director out in Wales, talking with them about some potential policies for unfiltered source water protection. But it comes with a lot of challenges too. It's been 30 years now. So there's a lot of people who have forgotten what those struggles were in that MOA process. There's staff turnover. People, just don't know. They're brand new altogether. Continued growth in New York City bureaucracy, it is difficult. We deal with them every day. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder. But we just keep pushing. New York State wetland regulations have become, whether you love wetlands, hate wetlands, whatever it is, it's become an issue of trying to incorporate some of our water quality protection programs when there's delays in determining whether there's a wetland where you can build things. And ensuring a qualified workforce. I mean, you guys see it. People are moving away. We've got aging population. It's hard to find local professionals to do a lot of the work that we do. Not directly to work for CWC, but a lot of the contractors that we work with. That septic program, we worked with 94 separate septic contractors last year. It's great. It's a whole economy right there. We're only 22 engineers. And we're constantly going down in engineers, and new engineers ain't coming in. So that's a major challenge for us, is to find that you can't build a septic system if you don't have an engineer. So we also have regional issues. We're in multiple economic development councils. We're in multiple DEC regions. We're in multiple DOT regions. We're somewhat in the Catskill Park. We're somewhat outside the Catskill Park. It's hard to have one vision or one voice as a watershed community. We have a lot of different opinions on things. So that's really hard. But we've got some good things coming up in the future. We're working on that Shokan wastewater treatment plant. Largest one that is in the watershed. It was a $75 million project to hook up about 500 properties in the hamlet of Shokan. We just launched our workforce development program. We're working with the city on a contract to allow some local municipalities, some local wastewater treatment plants, to build additions to their plants to allow for septic acceptance. When you get your septic pumped, it's got to go somewhere. We've got supply and demand issues there, and some of the local communities are looking to take on that issue. Inflow and infiltration is a major issue at our local wastewater treatment plants, and it's expensive. Wastewater treatment plant upgrades, we've got 2 new contracts coming in those programs. Community vitality measures, we just completed a multi-year study on evaluating what is the community vitality of the watershed. No big surprises, we're aging out, people moving away, real estate costs a lot of part-time homeowners, most of the things you would expect, but we're hoping we can take some of the work from that and build on it. The city has at least said that they are open to potentially swapping some of their existing properties. I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but I think that could be a good thing for community development if we could bring back some of the existing city property to the localities in order to do some sort of development. And the 2027 FAD is upcoming. So that basically is where the city will continue to, the FAD is a filtration avoidance determination. That's that waiver, and that gets renewed every 5 or 10 years. So that's what allows the city not to have to filter their water. So that's coming up, and that also brings about the requirements of what the city has to pay to the locals in order to get that waiver. It's all tied together in that FAD. A lot of information. Hopefully you could follow me on some of that. Yep.
So recently, I'm sure you're aware, in the news, there's been talk about New York City taking some of the watershed land to create some sort of solar arrays. And I'm wondering if you could comment or give us some clarification on that.
Sure. I've also seen that it's everywhere. Sometimes I hate to have to defend the city. I never once heard the city say that they want to build on the city property. And there's a couple issues. It gets a little convoluted here as well. There's city property, let's go on a bunch of things. There's private property, there's state property in the Catskill Park and outside the Catskill Park. There's city property inside the Catskill Park and outside the Catskill Park. And there's city property that was purchased before 1997, or that they owned before 1997, and after 1997. So those are all kind of different pots of things. The city has easements right now on all the land that they own after 1997. Those easements don't allow for any sort of development. And actually, some of the things that came up with the coalition and some of the other groups was that easement was supposed to have some abilities for the locals to put utility lines or turnarounds, things like that, on those properties. And somehow it got missed for a number of years, and it never ended up in the easements. And we haven't been able to use some of those utility lines that we thought we'd be able to do. So we've been trying to work on getting the state to reduce the easements, or reduce the language of the easements, so we can actually do some productive things on those properties.
So is that something your agency is involved in directly?
We're involved in some of the discussions. We don't really have a role in making anything happen. That's kind of a state issue. Where the solar panel stuff came up mostly is during these discussions, it came up that there was some concern from the locals, and again, we were Watershed Ag Council too. The main issue with the land acquisition had always been that it was being taken away and we couldn't develop it locally. It was impacting us negatively because we couldn't develop it. Not everybody feels that way. They like the open space, they're very happy with it, they don't want any development. But one of the reasons land acquisition has been the most controversial issue is, for the most part, the local folks wanted to be able to develop the property, not have it open space. With the solar that's been going up on a lot of private properties, people are realizing we've only got this much developable property left, and now we're losing it for solar projects. And it's kind of blown up way bigger than it really needed to be, understandably, without being in the room to understand it. But the concept was, listen, if we have options, and it could go over here on city property that can't be developed, or here on the last farm in town that we'd really like to keep a farm, can we at least have a dialogue about it and see, how that would work? Not everybody was in the room for those discussions, so that kind of pushes it a little more to be like, I think that they're trying to do that. But for what it's worth, dealing with the city all day, every day, I've never heard any plans of theirs to do any sort of development. Now, let me just say, that doesn't mean they never will. You never know what's going to happen. We got a new mayor, new everything, but I've never heard any plans. And the other thing that I've tried to explain to anybody who does have concerns on this is that all the land that they own prior to 1997, they don't have easements on that land. So if this was something that they were really pushing to do, they could do it now. And we haven't seen that happen. We haven't seen any activity or discussions or anything. So it gives me calm that that's not going to happen. Can I stand here and guarantee it's never going to happen? I can't.
Are people just like blowing it out of proportion and sensationalizing?
I think it's, and not necessarily on purpose. They're scared. It's a scary thought. I completely understand that. But I think maybe CWC and others, maybe we gotta, talk about this, with some others. But it gets moving pretty quick online, and it's hard to get ahead of.
Yeah.
And you don't wanna. It's not worth engaging online. That becomes worse. So this is actually, a good forum to kind of talk about these sort of things.
Thank you.
Debbie?
I was just wondering, and you may have told us and I missed it, how do you get your funding to do all these grants and loans?
Almost all of our funding comes from New York City. In those FADs, now the Department of Health, it used to be EPA, tells the city how much funding and what kind they have to give us.
Okay.
Now I said, all our money comes from the city. This is a quote that we say all the time. They don't pay us out of the kindness of their heart. They're required to pay us. If they didn't want to, or if they didn't have to, it would go away. I'm very sure of that. But we have built better relationships over the years to try to make it mutually beneficial, but they're required to pay us. So it's government service contracts, essentially.
Okay.
Yep.
In your opinion, I'm asking you to get your crystal ball out. What do you think about the FAD moving forward? Is that going to get renewed?
Yeah.
And if the FAD is not renewed at some future time, what is going to happen to all the land that they have, and who's it going to get sold to?
Here's another thing from 1997. The easements being put on was not, at least I don't think, I mean I wasn't there at the time, but my understanding is it wasn't the locals asking for those easements. We weren't necessarily concerned that they'd be sold for development somewhere down the road. It was the environmental groups in the state that wanted to make sure that the city wasn't going to sell off their land when budgets get tight. So, that's what happened in the 70s. They had major budget issues in the 70s, and they sold a whole bunch of really sensitive land down in the Croton system. And they actually built the airport right next to their reservoir because they sold that property to a developer and they built an airport. And now it's not their best water supply. Who would have thought? So that was the concept of the easements. It wasn't necessarily the locals saying we want open space. That almost was never a local concern. Maybe for some people, but that wasn't the political issue. I don't know if they could sell it. I just don't know the answer whether they could sell it. But that easement basically makes it worthless. And that was the concept with the environmentalists and the state, is that it's going to stay forever wild.
Okay, so the FAD is probably going to get renewed for
Yeah.
like 10 years?
Yep, probably 10 years.
And that's next year, right?
2027.
Okay.
Yep. It's an assumption, but it's
Yeah.
a strong chance it's going to get renewed.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Jason, I'm sorry. Hi, Jason. I'm from Delaware County. My name is Dana, and I'm wondering if you are aware the different counties that are in the watershed. I know that in December of 2025, Delaware County, I believe, signed and agreed to allow renewables on city land. I don't think that the people in Delaware County agree with that, but that is what I've learned was done. Are you aware of an agreement that was signed in December of 2025 to allow the city to put renewables on city land in Delaware County?
I don't know if I'm thinking of the same document you are. There was a group of stakeholders that signed a side agreement in 2025. Is that what you're referencing?
December of 2025,
Yeah.
the memorandum of
Yeah,
agreement.
there was a side agreement. It didn't specifically allow the city to develop on those properties. I'm trying to remember the language. It was something along the lines of, we will discuss options. Because some of the, again, concerns were, they didn't want the city forcing things, one, or whether they could, because there's easements on the property anyway. And again, with the limited developable properties, are there options, if we sit down and think about it, where that property would be more preferable than the farm or the open space that's currently a farm or could be developed into housing or whatever else? So it wasn't something that would allow them to do it because they can't right now under the easement. Nobody has the ability other than the state to allow that to happen. So it was just, let's talk.
That's what it sounded like. And, when I think about when people in Delaware County, at least in my experience, sold property to New York City, it was really important. It was required to clear any plastic, to clear any metal, get everything
No
off of those
structures. Had to be
properties.
big.
Right,
Yep.
it had to be clear and undeveloped.
Yep.
And I've learned, and this could be wrong because you don't know what's going to happen, what's not, that there are 3 projects in Delaware County currently being proposed to install solar panels on city-owned property. What I heard is in Arkville, which has
Our
suffered
office is in
terrible floods.
Arkville, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think in New Kingston, and then there's another place too. So, are you aware of any of this?
No.
Okay. Because why
It
would
doesn't
there,
even- it's
it
not
doesn't
that-
make sense.
I don't
Why would there
know.
be metal and plastic put on
Yeah, I-
land that they told us we could never put
I
anything
I
on?
can never guarantee anything to anybody. I don't know any details on that. But I don't know how, unless it's not considered development, how anything could happen without many more steps happening before that, including the city easement.
You gave a great presentation, by the way.
So just one really quick question, and I know Sue had asked, and so did you, about like renewable energy, but another question that I've gotten in town is, what about the data centers? I keep getting sent the same, like 2 or 3 articles about city lands being used as data centers in 5-acre plots.
Same answer. There's no city property that has an easement on it can have anything done prior to that easement being amended. And that process is not easy. I don't even know if that's on the table. There's been talks about fixing it because of things that we want that easement amended by. So, and that hasn't happened. So if everyone's on the same page for the things that we do want not being done, I think it makes it a harder shift for things that is more controversial. But again, I would say, crazy things happen, you never know.
I got a question on policing the easements. Andes, I'm from Ayrton Bensko, from Andes, and on Delaware County. Andes got 5 streams going in. They're pushing to put easements on the streams. They're talking to landowners and stuff. Tourist rates, get taxes and all that stuff. But what happens if there's a threat against the reservoir, like 9/11? And would they shut down those streams so you can't get near them? And no way to get in and out of town because of the easements on the stream. They own the stream. They, or
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what the answer to that would be. I think typically the easements are just access easements along the streams, not necessarily, you can't.
reason why I asked, I got a half-mile stream on my farm, and if I put easement on it, and I have to cross the bridge to get across it, if there's a threat against the reservoir like 9/11,
Yeah.
can I get in my place?
Yeah. Whoever you're working with, I would definitely ask them that. Yep.
I'm just curious of all the city-owned land, trying to understand, before 97, they don't have easements.
Yep.
Which means they could be developed.
Yeah.
And post 97, they have an easement. How much is pre and how much?
I don't know the answers to that, but take, for example, anything, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think some of the answers would be a lot of the land directly surrounding the reservoirs was land that they purchased way back when they built the reservoirs and over time. 97 is when that MOA came in, and that's part of the MOA was that those easements had to be put on for any new land bought at that time. So I just don't know what the total acreage is, but I would say they probably have quite a bit of uneased property. And if they really wanted to do something, if that was really on the docket, they could do that today. They could have done it yesterday or 5 years ago. I haven't seen that.
Has WC been involved with Hamden, New York, on battery storage and the pathway to the city or anything
I'm
like
aware
that?
of it, but we don't have any role with that. And I'm not sure what the process is right now or where they are on that.
So Jason, it sounds like because of the presentation that you're really an advocate for us,
100%.
for
If
the
that's
people.
one takeaway today is we are a local organization here to help people. There are benefits to the city from our programs, no question. But everything that we do is locals first, with the secondary benefits of water quality.
So just supposing that the city says, okay, we want to develop this land, we have the state's permission, we want to put solar, industrial solar, I want to be specific because residents have it, and they want to put industrial solar, but you advocate really for us.
Yeah.
What if in Delaware County, we get a petition of 4,000 residents that say no?
my suggestion would be keep it as local as possible coming up. I mean, we are a nonprofit, we've got, stakeholders, but there's only so much one nonprofit could do. Keep it at the local level. Because I'll also say, just like we were talking about before, 5 counties. I don't remember what town you're in Delaware
Andes.
County. Chances are, most Delaware County people probably don't want solar panels. I'm going to assume that. But maybe over in Ulster County, there might be some people that say, we would love this. Bring it on. So that gets tricky with CWC with land acquisition. We don't necessarily play a role in land acquisition itself, as controversial as that was. But there's a lot of people with different opinions on whether to do it or not to do it. Some of our board members are environmentalists, city reps, state reps. They could have a very different opinion than a supervisor from Greene County or Delaware County. So taking those positions, regardless of what my personal opinion is really hard for our organization because we represent so many different people.
So when the city said no development, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our county, and I'm sure others, have literally become tourism county. And people come from New York City all over the place to come and see the aesthetic nature, the beautiful quality. They're not gonna come up anymore if if we have solar panels everywhere. That's just not what they come for. And then, of course, property values. So I know other people have lots of different opinions, but I think New York City forced a lot of the areas to not develop, right? So, and the land was clear. And now we have this tourism economy that will be destroyed.
That's right.
If we have industrial solar.
The only thing I can say, talk to your local officials, talk to your state officials, those are the people to go to. Social media really runs it. It doesn't help. It makes it hard for officials to want to engage because they see that they're just going to get blasted every time. I see it all the time. I don't engage in it, but it's hard to do it on social media. It's good to get information out, but it turns nasty pretty quick. Go to your state of local first and work your way up and explain to them, because when this 27 fad comes around, that could be something that's brought up during those discussions is, hey, we want to make sure that that's something off the table. I can't guarantee everybody would agree with that, but it's possible. But if you don't let your locals know to make that point, then it gets lost. Yep.
If they vacated the FAD, how long do you think the filtration system would come on board?
They are already estimating 20 to 30 years.
Really?
Yeah. And they don't have a specific number identified right now, but it would be tens of billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars to operate annually. So that's one of the major points that CWC has when we advocate for contracts and everything else is, we're spending $60 million a year. Yes, we're building a 75. That's a lot of money. The city has concerns about that, or rising costs of septics. But our argument is, the alternative is going to cost you a whole lot more. Right. So let's work together.
That's always been their argument.
That's right. Yeah. Let's work together and make this work for everybody. And to the city's credit, they're better than they were. I mean, they really are. We don't agree on everything, but we've got a much better arrangement now than we have in the past. Yep.
Okay, so probably everybody here grew up with a lot of negatory feelings from our neighbors because they were very wounded in the watershed to lose our communities and towns in the 1920s and up through the 1960s down in Cannonsville and so on. And so I also know that the Word of God tells us in everything give thanks. So giving thanks from New York City does not come easy, but I do. I'm a great beneficiary. I got a free septic. The Watershed Ag program has built me fence, built me a covered barnyard, put in spring development. I have local contractors like her brother do the work at New York's. And the big point of what you're saying is it isn't a bunch of fat cats from New York City that are running these things, it's us, really.
That's right. That's right.
And that Watershed Ag program, the gal that oversees my
Local
benefits
people. Yep.
is from Andes, Cowstill, the town of Andes for mom. The other people in the program down there, they own livestock. So what's good for them is good for us, and I trust them very much. And I thank you for, it's a good reminder that we are really being blessed here. I know we can have fears. Yeah, I don't go to New York City, and I'm thankful I don't live in New York City, but they do keep us afloat up here in the Catskills in many ways.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah.
Are there plans to expand the educational piece into the city so that people have a broader understanding?
We do provide grants to city schools. You know, a lot of the school grants that we give in the city are to provide them field trip money to come up to Frost Valley. You know, I know our local schools, you know, go down to Frost Valley a lot, so it's nice to have the local school students and the city school students come at the same time, and they can talk and collaborate and work on projects together. So that's something that we've been doing for a long time.
Okay, because I know that's something when I was active duty that I ran into. I worked with a lot of people that were from the city, and they had, you know, they knew where the Catskills were, but they had no idea where their water was coming from, and they thought that that was like really crazy when they started hearing the story. So I was just wondering like how broad of a program that
It's
is.
hard to get the word out, both in the city and here. People don't realize what we're a part of here. It's a big deal.
CWC doing anything about invasive species like the knotweed and?
We don't, but there are other agencies that do. I think WAC works on some invasive species. Catskill Center does some invasive species. DEP does a lot of invasive species. We don't specifically have a program for it.
And RCS.
Yeah. The stream programs and RCS. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you.